I want to touch on the countdown that inspired this video for a second. In it, a funny thing that ended up happening was that every role had 3 champions repping them, with 1 in each of the top 5. My list clearly doesn't have that, leaning more towards other roles, which makes sense as not everyone has similar preferences. And as I've made it very clear, there's a specific role that I do not like playing. But due to a recent release changing how my order went, my top 5 just so happens to have a champion from each role, which I wasn't expecting to happen. Just wanted to point that out since it's a funny coincidence. So now, let's start off the last third of this video with my favorite attack damage carry.
An Imperial Dragon does whatever he feels like doing.
Ignicarus Gigantorino Rexlaspes Alvarentis, yes that's his full name, is the newest champion to be on this list, which as of making this, only 4 champions have released since then. And while this little fellow might not look like it, he's actually royalty, being an Imperial Dragon. No, not of the Primate variety, but a special class of dragon that served alongside Camivore during their kingdom's reign. But when Viego went off the rails and asked them to follow him to the Blessed Isles, several of them said, and stayed as he destroyed his own kingdom. One of those who stayed would eventually give birth to a small little dragon, though they would end up being taken by Noxians before washing ashore alongside their shipwreck. He would survive on his own before meeting a young boy named Marino, who would somehow teach this dragon how to talk, and would give him the nickname Smolder, because he's small. Eventually the young boy would grow up, leaving Smolder to become lonely, though not for long, as an accidental forest fire he started caused his mother to find out where he was, who was looking for him over the past few years. For now though, she and Smolder are resting, both intending to return to Camivore once he's older, in order to help rebuild their fallen kingdom. It's a pretty good story overall, but the big thing that carries it is Smolder himself. Depending on if you can tolerate him. He's a hyperactive child and he can easily be the type of character that can get on your nerves if you don't like them. Me personally though, I don't mind him, and in a lot of areas I find him pretty cute, but I can see why people would be bothered. The same can actually be said for his design. For what was supposed to be both a monster champion and a dragon, people were naturally disappointed when we had this fat-headed baby dropped on us. And with some of the original textures, it also made him look pretty uncanny. Then it was also pointed out that he looked like a Skylander and was doing the same pose as G1 Spyro in his splash arts. And all of a sudden I stopped having issues with his design. Okay, now that's an exaggeration, mostly because I didn't have an issue with it to begin with. He's just such a cute little fella that it's so hard for me to hate him. But now we've got to talk about the elephant in the room, his gameplay, and how he managed to make it onto this list while no other ADCs did. As I mentioned previously, I don't like how many ADCs play because many of them are so heavy on auto attacking that it just feels like I'm playing a clicker game, but there are a few that I do enjoy a bit. And most of them fall into the category of AD casters, basically ADCs who care more about casting abilities than right clicking. Smolder easily falls into this category, as not only is it the main source of his damage, but it's important for stacking his passive. Every time Smolder hits an enemy champion with an ability, or kills an enemy with his Q, he gains a stack of Dragon Practice, which adds additional magic damage to all of his abilities, making them more deadly as the game goes on. But more importantly, it improves how his Q works. At base, it's just a point-and-click ability, nothing special. It does apply on hit effects similar to Ezreal's Q, so Sheen works really great with it, but it's not incredible. But as you gain stacks of Dragon's Practice, it becomes incredibly deadly. At 25, it explodes in an area, dealing damage to those around the main target, making it capable of wave clearing. This is already pretty nice, but at 125, it now has embers shoot off of it, hitting those behind the initial target, which makes it so good for poking enemies who are hiding off behind their minions, as well as clearing caster minions if you manage to hit a melee creep. Finally, at 125, the damage from Q ignites enemies on hit, during which they take percent max health true damage, and executing them once their health reaches a certain percent. Jesus. And that percent increases with passive stacks? Okay, I do like this little fellow, but that is a little bit too much. Built-in Elder Dragon is kinda fucking insane. It has been balanced out a bit, but I'm shocked it still remains in there. That outlier aside, Smolder fills the role of a hyper carry very nicely, and we've only gone over his first ability. His W, Achoo, has him sneeze a fireball that slows and damages those hit, pulsing if it hits an enemy champion for more wave clear and stacking. His E gives him a burst of movement speed, while he peppers nearby enemies, which is fine for an escape and chasing, but the real benefit is that it actually goes over terrain. It also attacks more depending on how many passive stacks you have, so in the late game you can just melt someone. And finally his ultimate, Mom, has the little baby cry for his mommy, and she does not take kindly to you bullying her child, scorching the earth as she flies by. If she hits an enemy champion directly, they take extra damage and are slowed, and if she hits Smolder at any point, he actually gets healed. This is a fantastic ability for engaging with a chunk of damage, great for during a fight to keep Smolder alive, and as a means to finish off fleeing enemies. Surprisingly versatile for a pretty simple ability. Plus it hits slightly behind Smolder, so aiming it in the opposite direction can catch them off surprise, which is very funny. Also worth noting that Smolder has a couple different builds you can try. There's the intended build of Crit with Infinity Edge, Essence Reaver, and Rapid Fire Cannon for some chunky Qs, but thanks to his scaling damage, a more bruiser build with Spear Shojin, Triforce, and defensive items can also be really good. There's even an AP style where you just chunk people with W and ultimates, and regardless of what playstyle you use, you'll always be adorable as possible. I really went into this video thinking we weren't going to be talking about any ADCs because of how much I disliked the role, but Smolder was a pleasant surprise and has become one of my favorite releases in the past few years. I don't know when we will see this tiny fledgling again, but I really hope that it's much sooner than later. Just hope that he isn't too upset that he only got 5th place on this list. Sorry little buddy, but the next 4 got a lot over you.
Well, my mom works for Riot, and she's gonna ban you.
No, number 4 is not Jhin. I already talked about my favorite ADC was Smolder, and I don't enjoy playing him mid enough to include him. He just missed the list. Though we aren't leaving the bot lane just yet, because we do have another role we can talk about. Supports. I'm actually kinda surprised we didn't have more supports to talk about, because it's probably my most played role, mostly because it's the role nobody wants to play, and if I'm playing ranked, I'd rather play the role that has influence over myself and another teammate, instead of just letting our bot lane fucking flounder. And there's a ton of supports I love to play. Zyra is probably the one that I do the best with, but to be honest I only really like the gameplay. Everything else is just a lazy copy of Poison Ivy. Zona is pretty fun, but at times it does feel like she's kinda boring. And Leona really makes me wish I was playing top lane, because god I just don't like tank support items. But there is one support that excels in every aspect of the game, and easily takes the crown for this role. No matter who crosses their path, all will drown. No. The other guy. Kinda funny how I just shafted Leona when the crown for the best support went to another tank support in Nautilus. Though there are plenty of reasons why the Titan of the Depths managed to pull himself to the top. And I do mean plenty, because Nautilus, more so than a lot of other champions, does pretty much everything right in my books. And that's not an exaggeration. From gameplay to design to story, everything is amazing. In fact, the story is the thing that I think is done the best, as he has my favorite of any champion. A diver from Bilgewater, Nautilus would work for anyone who asked, with his only condition being that the crew would make an offering of some gold to the sea before he entered. Now most people thought this was merely a made up superstition, but it got him to work and they made a lot more than they lost, so they went along with it. Then one day, him and the crew he had been working with were bought by a foreign captain, looking to make claim to a treasure found in a shrouded shipwreck. To ensure he was able to retrieve it, the captain forced Nautilus into a giant diving suit, and had him dive down to retrieve it, refusing to pay the tithe until Nautilus had retrieved some treasure. Unfortunately, Nautilus wouldn't be retrieving anything, as something grabbed him, dragging him down into the depths, along with the ship's anchor that Nautilus tried to use as a lifeline. When he had awoken, he found himself merged with the diving suit, and when he had finally returned to the shores, years had passed, and the captain was nowhere to be found. Nautilus then returned to the sea, taking his anger and revenge out on anyone who dared cross the seas without paying his tithe. Okay, there's so much that I love about this story, such as how it perfectly modernizes his old lore, but easily the coolest part is how Nautilus became part of his own belief. The tithe was just something Nautilus believed in, with no proof of whether or not it was actually real or not. And it's heavily implied that what changed him wasn't related to the superstition. But as a result of it, Nautilus now punishes those who don't give him his payment, becoming the very thing he asked to make offerings to. Nautilus turned his own superstition into a real belief across Bilgewater. It's something that I've never seen explored in a story before, and it's easily one of the coolest ways they could have taken a story. Definitely better than their first attempt at changing it. The one thing that bugs me about the new story though, why is Nautilus so massive? Did whatever grabbed him cause the suit to somehow expand? Or did the captain just bring a suit bigger than most ships? Guess I shouldn't complain too much though, because wow, I love this design. Though to be honest, there was something already in its favor. Weapons and character design has always been a strange case to me, because while you have a ton of traditional weapons that work really well, the weapons that really grab my attention are the ones that are less used. And anchors are probably one of my favorites. Something about a character wielding a giant piece of iron, usually bigger than their own body, has always seemed like one of the coolest design choices you could give a character. I absolutely love it. I've actually been considering doing a list of top 10 anchor wielders for a while, provided I can find enough candidates, and Nautilus would easily be very high on that list. Taking inspiration from Bioshock's Big Daddies, Nautilus's design stands out from the rest of Bilgewater. I'm honestly struggling to put into words why the design is so cool because, well, just look at it. Sure, the in-game model looks a bit goofy due to its age, but that shouldn't be a knock against the design itself. Newer games have done a better job showcasing the design, such as Wild Rift having an updated design that looks more closely to the new Dawn cinematic, but my personal favorite is from Legends of Runeterra. The more angular body combined with a narrower view window makes him look so much more intimidating. Also, something funny involving the base design, his name is Nautilus, which likely came from 1000 Leagues Under the Sea, but is also the name of these silly sea creatures, so the goofiness of his in-game model fits given how goofy these little guys are. As for his gameplay, Nautilus is a very interesting one. Originally designed as a jungler, and experimented a bit as a top laner, Nautilus primarily sees play as a tanky support, mainly because he's one of the few champions in this game with a hook. A hook, for those unaware, is a projectile that grabs an opponent and pulls them towards you, with there being 4 different hook champions. And while they all do have their own differences, Nautilus is the only one whose hook can't go through walls. And unlike Blitzcrank and Pike, who pull the target directly towards them, or Thresh, who pulls himself to the target if he pleases, hitting a champion with Dredgeline pulls Nautilus and the enemy halfway towards each other. So it puts you out of position as much as the other champion. So it sounds worse than all of the other hooks. So what's the unique benefit to it? Well, for one, you can do this. Yep, that's why you can't grab walls. If Dredgeline connects with a wall or a minion, Nautilus will drag himself straight towards it, allowing for it to be used as mobility. This also makes it so you're not as punished if you miss someone who is near a wall, as you can pull yourself next to them, which can set you up to lock them down. Sure, you missed your pull, but your passive snares the first person you auto-tag, and your E does damage and slows people around you, so you still got some tricks to keep people in place. Oh, and if you hit a wall, it refunds half the cooldown and mana cost, so that pull will be back up sooner than people expect. And the second advantage that you have is that Nautilus is extremely tanky, even with some of the support items which don't give you as much bulk as traditional tank items. This is because of his W, which gives you a shield scaling with your health as well as damage on hits. This makes you able to survive a lot of poke and trades while dishing out more punishment, which also nullifies the downside of dragging yourself out of position. If anything, pulling yourself out of position means they're more likely to focus on you and not your carry. Combine all of this with his ultimate depth charge, which sends out a homing geyser that knocks up everyone on its way to the target, and you have a bulky engager that can start a fight and keep someone locked down. This makes him amazing at all parts of the game. In lane, you can get picks by simply hooking someone and keeping them in place, and during team fights, you can either lock down a carry to swing things in your favor, or take the brunt of the hurt for your team. And all of this isn't even considering Arena, where he might be my favorite champion to play there. Not only does he synergize super well with a ton of augments, but as I mentioned during Sejuani's segment, the prismatic tank items are absolutely amazing, especially on him. Cruelty, Pyromancer's Cloak, Darkhold Gauntlet, and especially Force of Entropy. You thought all that CC was devastating already? Well, now it crits and locks you down even longer. Everything about Nautilus is just wonderful. Any issues I have with him are nitpicks and are completely eclipsed by all the positives that I can say about him. Really, the only thing I have left to answer is, why didn't he take number 1 if he's so perfect? And the truth is that this is a very close competition. While every other champion I talked about so far has been ones that I've loved, these top 4 were easily my all-time favorites, and it was a disgustingly close call between all of them. I could even see a future where any of them take the top spot. Though for right now, I'm happy with my order and I'm happy with Nautilus's placement. Whether it's in the Reckoner's Arena or on Summoner's Rift, Nautilus will drag down all of those who don't pay their dues. There are a lot of reasons why this video took so long to make. There were constant changes being made, I wasn't motivated, I had other projects I wanted to work on. But one of the biggest reasons was that there was an expected rework to be released for a champion that I liked, and so I wanted to wait for it to come out. But he wasn't just any champion. He was the champion that got me into this game to begin with. This is probably going to be one of the hardest champions to talk about, mostly because I had to keep myself from playing defense when it came to a lot of things. Skarner's rework was one of the most anticipated reworks we've had in a long time, taking more than a year to even get information about it, and it being expected to happen for at least half a decade, and naturally, a lot of Skarner mains weren't happy with the results. And as for me, who put a ton of hours into the Scorpion, and obviously had him on this list previously, I have to say that the new Skarner did not move a spot on the list. He was 3rd before the rework and he's 3rd afterwards. Though now it's for different reasons, so let's talk about the laundry list of changes he has. And start off with the biggest one that got a lot of people riled up, the new lore. I mentioned in the previous segment that Nautilus has my favorite lore of any champion, and that is still true. But Old Skarner was a very close second, telling the tragic tale of the last alive member of the Brackern, a race of crystal beings that buried themselves underground to avoid conflict, only to be dug up and harvested by the Piltovans in order to create Hextech. Skarner now wandered alone, following the faint voices of his kind lost to the wind. It was extremely good, and it led to my favorite color story, Dream Song, which I absolutely recommend reading even though it's no longer canon. It was the one thing everyone loved about Old Skarner. But since Riot was pushing Arcane to the masses and they wanted to make it canon and didn't want to include all those moral quandaries that came with the fact that Piltover was harvesting living beings to power their TVs, they decided to retcon all of that away. Now the Brackern are giant creatures that originally taught Ishtal the first earthbending techniques, with Skarner staying after becoming a bit overprotective of them. He would watch them grow as if they were like his children, and like an overprotective parent, he would become horrified after seeing the types of people they were hanging out with. After nearly losing the Ishtal people during the fall of Shurima, and Acacia imploding soon afterwards, Skarner felt it was best to isolate the region, cutting the culture off from the rest of the world, while he himself would bury underground. It was such a radical departure from what Skarner was that it doesn't feel like the same character, and I completely understand how people would be very upset about that. But, to play devil's advocate, I don't hate it at all. A lot of people hate how Skarner comes off like one of those boomer parents that thinks everyone else is out there to get them and their family, and if you have issues with that, I completely understand. But personally, it doesn't bother me because not only is the story not saying he's right in that belief, he's also not entirely wrong. Shurima did fall. Acacia is a purple wasteland, and the first region to interact with Ishtal in years, Piltover, is harvesting it for resources. Skarner is completely justified in his fears. It's just that his means are just as damaging as what he's trying to protect his people from. He's doing the wrong thing for the right reason. Now let's compare this to Kiana's motive, a champion he is stated to be a rival to. Her goal is to lead Ishtal to the outside world like her people want, but her entire reason to do this is to usurp her sisters and to gain more power by appealing to what the population wants. She's doing the right thing for the wrong reason. That's why these two are placed as rivals despite Skarner being able to dumpster Kiana, because they are ideologically opposed. And Skarner is in a unique position where he can still develop as a character. A lot of older characters, or non-human characters, are put into situations where Riot can't or won't develop them any further, leaving them either better off as background characters or as side characters. Skarner, meanwhile, has the room to grow as a person, or Scorpion. he can realize his mistakes, let the people of Ishtal leave the seclusion. Hell, the Bracken are dead in this version of the lore. Maybe he can even go out himself and reconnect with them. Unfortunately, due to the current state of the game's narrative, that likely won't happen for years, and I do still prefer a lot of his old lore. But I'm not gonna lie and say that I hate it. Well, that was already a lot to unpack, and we're already just scratching the surface on why he's here. So let's actually start scratching it a bit more and look at his surface. Because hot damn, this design is cool. I do hold a bit of nostalgia for how old Skarner looked, and think it was a massive missed opportunity not to give him a Crystal and Dominus skin. Seriously, it's a purple crystal thematic. It was right there. But the rework is so fucking good. Taking the original Scorpion design and adding elements of other arthropods, the new design looks so cool even if the crystal thematic had to be removed, though they do still keep him tied to an earth thematic. His head looks so much better, he reads much better, and the three stingers are able to grab stuff like a hand, which is so cool. I do wish the claws were bigger like in the concept art. Feels weird seeing them so small. All of this is capped off by his gameplay changes, and this is the one thing I'm not gonna hold back on liking. I have a special place in my heart for old Skarner. Hell, I'm one of the few people out there who wasn't completely against the spires, but there was a damn good reason why people have been asking him to be reworked, or at least reverted. Q was underwhelming and required you to eviscerate your key to make it useful. W was extremely boring. Spires forced you to play jungle because Ride refused to put any in the lanes. And while E was the least bad, a projectile that lets you stun on your next auto isn't really what I would call peak gameplay. Really, the only amazing part of him was his ultimate Impale, being able to drag people around and chain CC on them. But we could do better. So after all these years of waiting and the multiple versions they tried, what was Riot's glorious solution?
I threw a rock at him!
Honestly, that's a bit reductive, because there is a little bit more to it than that. Q allows you to pull a rock out of the earth, empowering your next 3 auto attacks, making them hit in an area, with the last one slamming the rock down for extra damage. This gives Skarner good dueling and wave clearing, just like Crystal Slash, but overall feels better, especially with the slam at the end. But what if you can't get close enough to be able to start mauling them? Well, you can just yuck that boulder right at them. Being able to double as poke is super nice, and it can even be used during the wind down of your auto attacks, making the hit go faster. Plus it helps stack his passive, which deals damage over time after 3 hits on the same target, which is okay but is a bit underwhelming admittedly, probably the weakest part of his kit. I also wasn't expecting them to keep the shield with the rework, but they did, though it functions completely differently this time. Instead of gaining a shield and movement speed when activated, Skarner stomps the ground creating a shockwave, giving himself a shield while damaging and slowing nearby enemies. It basically has the opposite utility of the old W, trading mobility for damage and disruption, though it does hurt the old Karner playstyle, where you would stack movement speed so you can run and ult people. We truly have lost something great, but it's okay because now Impale is an AoE, holy shit. Granted it only grabs 3 people and you can't turn around like you used to be able to, but this is so cool. And more balanced to be honest. Old Impale, just like Warwick's old ultimate, was a point and click suppression, except Skarner was one of the few suppressions that didn't break when getting CC'd, meaning you had to buy QSS to escape it. The new version still has those traits, it's still a suppression, but it now stabs with a wind up giving room to dodge. The area it stabs in is a triangle, making it harder to land at a distance, but easier when you're up close and personal. That might seem like a negative to those who play him, but I personally think fair game design is actually a positive. Plus, there is a little something that you can do that makes it a bit easier. Since Skarner uses his stingers to grab people, he naturally can't hold a rock at the same time he uses his ultimate. So if you're already holding a rock when you use your ultimate, it will throw it at the target during the wind up, and now would be a good time to let you know that the rock also slows the target when it hits, making it easier to get that stab. Pretty smart thing to do, honestly. Okay, that's all well and good, but this is all basic stuff. Like, the most unique part of this remix is something that was already there. Where's the new spice? You're gonna need something really cool to make yourself... I'm gonna be honest, this is some of the most fun I've had in this game. With a good old emergency call to your E, you have what is essentially a Scion ult that pushes people like Poppy's E, that can also move through walls. It only does damage when it collides with terrain, but the stun you get and the damage more than make up for it. This is also likely why you can't turn when using your ultimate, since it would be obnoxiously easy to drag someone into your turret and then pin them against it, though it's still not impossible. You can ult them towards it, then slow with your W and reposition so you can throw them in with your E, or more likely, you can shove them into it with your E to begin with, then use your ult to drag them further in if they try to escape. This not only feels much better for the cheesy strats you could do, but also allows you to attempt it before getting your ultimate. Plus you can shove people out of the ring in arena, which is pretty sweet. And even on its own, it's a fun form of disruption that allows for some fun flank routes, similar to what Kayn has. The only issue I have with this ability is the fact that it sets your movement speed when using it, which feels really shitty if you were moving faster than the startup when you first use it. But even with that, it ultimately isn't enough to dissuade me, and I think that's the biggest takeaway for me. The Skarner rework isn't perfect by any means, but for every issue I have, there's something that outweighs it. His fantastic old lore may be gone, but the new one opens new possibilities. Losing the crystal thematic is tragic, but the new design is amazing, and while there were some hiccups with Skarner's gameplay, it adds a ton that makes him a joy to play. If you're a diehard Skarner main who misses the original, I don't blame you. Part of me misses him too. He was the guy that got me to even try this game in the first place, so without him, I wouldn't be here right now. But I'm not gonna lie to myself and say that I like the new version of him less than I do the old one. I can't say I'm gonna love him as long as I did with the old Skarner because I don't know if I'm gonna be sticking around for that long, but I definitely will love him for as long as I stay. You may be just a monster to some, but to me, you are so much more. We're reaching the end of this long journey, with just 2 more champions left to talk about. Throughout this list, we've seen characters with stories that will stick with me for years to come, designs that have inspired me to improve my own work, and gameplay that has been at the peak of design. Now, if we take all of those aspects, mix them together, and what we have is a character that by objective standards isn't very good. Well, this might be confusing to some, and not for the reason you might think. I said Smolder is my favorite ADC, what the hell is Kog'Maw doing here? Well, that's because he's not my favorite ADC. He's actually my favorite mid laner. But more on that later. Kog'Maw is a bit of an anomaly in the same way that Cho'Gath is, where he suffers from a lot of similar issues, but has some positives of his own that make up for it. Lord definitely isn't one of them. He's a little bug from the void and he's trying to find the dim goon that he senses. That's it. It's slightly better than Cho'Gath. Kog'Maw is actually defined as a character here, but the only thing that we know is that he likes eating, and he's looking for Malzahar. And like Cho, it has been pretty much unchanged since his release, over a decade and a half ago. Thankfully something that was changed was his design, partly. He still has the same body shape, but the textures were completely redone, changed from an extremely grotesque appearance to a more cute one, which still keeps up a lot of the insect-like traits, but also gives him a beak-like mouth that I think is really cute. And I love him. I'm sure you can make some arguments that the design isn't objectively great, but I'm gonna be completely honest.
I don't care.
This might be my favorite design in the entire game. Unsurprising that the bug is the one that I love. And that's before even considering the fact that he has one of the best skins in the entire game. And while the cuteness of him is a big part of why I like him, there's actually something really cool about his design that actually ties into his lore. See, he attacks by spewing acid, and in both lore and voice lines, he constantly talks about being hungry, and while the original particle effects for him looked very barfy, it acted more like acid and now has a very acid-like texture. So we have a character who spits acid at you, that seemingly comes from the stomach, and is constantly hungry. Kog'Maw is essentially attacking you with stomach acid, which is extremely clever since your body produces it to digest things, and with him being constantly hungry, he's most likely going to be constantly making the stuff, meaning that in turn, he has more of it to attack you with. This probably wasn't something intentional and is likely me overthinking it, but it's an extremely cool thing that I noticed. But now we have to talk about the most interesting part about Kog'Maw, his gameplay. And circle back to my comments about him not being my favorite ADC. To explain what he does first, his Q lobs a ball of acid that damages and shreds enemies' resistances, W gives him bonus attack range and damage on hit, E sends out a trail of ooze that damages and slows enemies, and the ultimate fires a projectile that lands after delay, and deals more damage the lower health they have. The reason why I bring these up first is that for ADC Kog'Maw, almost all of these abilities are fucking worthless. Kog'Maw's role is that of an attack speed hypercarry, stacking as many on-hit items and attack speed as possible in order to shred people down, and as a result only your W is really important. Q is slightly better after they changed it so it comes out faster the more attack speed you have, but E and even your ultimate are completely worthless, especially since E lacks AD scaling, and while your ultimate does have it, you don't build much AD to begin with so it doesn't change anything. This turns AD Kog'Maw into a right-click simulator, where most of your kit is completely worthless. Not to mention Kog'Maw has one of the worst passives in the entire game. Riot. I'm a champion that is supposed to attack people from distance while staying alive. Why did you give me a passive that requires me to die near people. I guess I'd rather play AD Kog'Maw over a lot of other ADCs, but that's more because I like Kog'Maw in general rather than because I like this playstyle. But real Kog'Maw players know that there's another way, a playstyle that doesn't have any of these issues. One where all of your abilities are good, where you do more than right click, and that is infinitely more fun than ADC. AP Kog'Maw. With a simple change in itemization, everything becomes so much better. Your Q does damage, and a chunk of it too. E can wipe out a wave effortlessly and becomes an amazing harass tool. Even your dog-ass passive, which has no damage scaling on it for some reason, gets amplified thanks to Shadow Flame. And while you may think W gets shafted in this case, and it is the worst ability in AP, the damage does scale with ability power, and you don't always have your spells up, so it's actually a really nice thing to have for a bit of harass. But the biggest increase in power comes from his ultimate. Living Artillery goes from being one of the most mediocre ultimates in the entire game to being my absolute favorite, and that is no exaggeration. The damage amp you get from having actual damaging items for the ability is really nice, since it does much better with the AP items, but there's an even bigger benefit to AP Kog'Maw. See, I didn't mention it earlier when describing the ability, but Living Artillery is a spammable, having an extremely short cooldown. The downside, however, is that every successive cast increases the mana cost by 40, meaning you will eventually get to the point where it is impossible to use another one, or even your other abilities too, because you just run out of mana. But with AP, most of your items give you mana, and you can comfortably buy Seraph's Embrace, so the costs are never an issue, and you actually live up to the name Living Artillery, being able to drop enemies from far away with a well-placed mortar. Plus, since your ultimate does more damage on low health targets, Shadow Flame makes it hit even harder, which is so awesome. Seeing my little bug bop someone out of existence makes me so happy. And to be honest, I think that is actually the biggest thing that got Kog'Maw so high on this list. He just makes me happy. A former countdown maker once referred to this feeling of liking something just because it makes you happy as pure endearment, and I think what she described perfectly encapsulates Kog'Maw for me. I love seeing this silly little guy, I love his goofy little waddle, I love the small little hands and the big old eyes. It's the same thing as something like Maractus, where them just being here brightens my day. I could have joined this game at any point, but I'm glad I was able to while this little goober was in the game. And unfortunately there may be a future where they aren't. During the latest VGU poll, latest isn't 3 years ago, Kog'Maw was on the poll, and even managed to beat Nocturne the fucking loser. However, during the dev insights, they explicitly said if they reworked him, they intended to remove all of the cuteness from him in order to make him more like other Voidborn, and would kill AP Kog'Maw if it would make AD Kog'Maw better. This would basically nuke him from existence. Kog'Maw doesn't have any actual personality, but due to him being so cute, he has basically taken on the personality of a cute little baby man in the eyes of the community, which actually sets him apart from all of the other Voidborns, being the only one that isn't a monster. So changing him to be like the rest of them removes what little Kog'Maw has going for him, to basically add nothing. And I think I've made it very clear why killing AP Kog'Maw would be fucking awful. Thankfully, and I can't believe I'm saying this as a positive, Riot has been slowing down on reworks, so it should give them time to reevaluate and course correct if they ever rework him, because losing what we have now would be a massive tragedy. Being completely honest, the only thing stopping Kog'Maw from just steamrolling his way to first place is the complete lack of lore and the less than stellar AD gameplay. If I was to improve his gameplay, I would add the same animation speed up his Q has to his E and ultimate, so you feel more inclined to use them during AD Kog'Maw, and give him a better passive, and give him some real lore, then he'd be perfect. Then again, he is still perfect in my heart. But despite that, we still have one more champion left to talk about.
Not!
Wow, what a surprise. The champion that I said in the title of the video was my favorite champion ended up being my favorite champion. Well, that video came out 5 years ago, so things could have changed, but they didn't. Gnar is still the king of this castle. Kog'Maw came close, but Gnar overall remains as my #1 little friend. So, after all this time, let's explain exactly why this little orange fuzzball managed to take it all. Like with Fizz and Poppy, Gnar is a Yordle, but you may have noticed he looks very different from the rest of them. That's because he's actually from prehistoric times, or the closest thing that Runeterra has to that. Gnar grew up in the Freljord back during the ages when the three sisters still lived, and he lived a rather happy life, playing in the snow, learning to hunt from his family, even playing with the Yetis that resided there. He even managed to take the jawbone of a Druvask, which he then used as his own boomerang, considering himself a true hunter after claiming it, though these brighter days wouldn't last for long, as Lissandra was tricked into awakening the Watchers. Sensing that they would hurt his friends, Gnar flew into a rage, which awakened his dormant power, transforming him from a little fluff ball into a massive monster that rivaled even the Yetis in size. Before Gnar could land a blow, however, Lissandra entombed the Watchers in ice, with Gnar winding up as collateral. He would remain frozen until modern day when he was finally free, now in a new and familiar world. I will admit though, the lore has taken a bit of a hit due to recent retcon, and not even just retcons directly to the story itself, but also how Yordles as a species work. Like since the original lore, Yordles would change to spirits that can't die, and even if they die they simply respawn in Bandle City. That's why Vex hates her life since she wants to die, and again, Heimerdinger. So shouldn't this mean Gnar's family isn't gone? Just screw with the rest of the Yordles? This is also one of the few instances where I think Legends of Runeterra actually made the lore worse. Instead of making its followers like researchers trying to find out about the ancient Yordles or even animals Gnar could be hunting since he's a hunter, they instead made up a new section of Bandle City where time doesn't move. And there's ancient Yordles there too, meaning Gnar is no longer the last one? Yeah, I don't think it's good, but I still do like parts of the little guy's story. One of my favorites being his color story with Rengar, where he tries to connect with him since they're both hunters, only for Rengar to get annoyed by a little child following him and tossing Gnar's boomerang away, only for Gnar to rage out and make him realize he made a big mistake. It's a fun little read and fitting of this super adorable little fuzzball. Seriously, look at how cute he is. I remember seeing him while scrolling through the store back in the day, and him immediately catching my eye, and that's before we even talk about the big Gnar, which turns the small baby into the big baby. And I like them still having the blue highlights in both forms as a way of connecting the designs, and how right before he goes Mega, his movement becomes way more skittish and feral. But let's get to the big thing, his gameplay, because there's a lot to talk about. Like Shyvana, Gnar is a transforming champion, but does it in a way that no other champion has. Most transformation champions either transform the power themselves up, or has a way to change back and forth. Gnar works like a combination of both of these, but with one major difference. Gnar's change is involuntary. Every other champion gets to choose when they transform, but with Rage Gene, it happens on its own. Instead of having a mana bar, Gnar has a rage bar that builds up during battle. This determines how angry he is, and once his meter gets maxed out, Gnar will transform into Mega Gnar after a few seconds, or when he casts an ability while the bar is full, and which form you're in changes how you play. Not only do they have different abilities, which I'll talk about in a minute, but they also gain different bonus stats as well. Mini Gnar gains extra movement speed, attack speed, and range, while Mega Gnar gains extra attack damage, health, and resistances. This directly references how they are meant to be played. Mini Gnar being a ranged tank buster who kites his enemies, while Mega Gnar is a tank that engages the fights. This is further enforced by their abilities. While in mini form, Gnar's Q has him toss his boomerang, which stops at the first enemy hit, before returning back to him, while in Mega form he just throws a massive boulder that does more damage, is bigger, but has startup and doesn't return. Both are really good for poking, but one is better for smaller, more frequent hits, while the other one is better for chunking. His W is where the biggest differences are. Mini Gnar's W, Hyper, is a completely passive ability, making his attacks apply a stack on his opponent that proc at 3, dealing a burst of magic damage while giving Gnar movement speed. Not only does this let Gnar kite easier, but it being max health damage helps him tank bust easier, allowing you to break them down, which can be complemented by Black Cleaver, one of Gnar's best items, especially since it's magic damage and most of your damaging items are physical damage, meaning it can be tricky to itemize against. While in Mega meanwhile, you have Wallop, which slams an area in front of Gnar, damaging and stunning enemies' hits, allowing you to peel those pesky tanks off your carries should they engage, or lock down a carry yourself, though it does have a delay so it's not guaranteed. For both forms, your E just lets you hop forward, but both of them have something special to them. Hop can bounce off an ally or an enemy for some extra distance and gives Gnar bonus attack speed, while Crunch deals extra damage and hits in a larger area. You can also cast abilities during the leap, allowing you to perform some fun combos in the process. This all culminates in his ultimate, Gnar. For Mini Gnar, it's surprisingly a passive ability, simply increasing Hyper's movement speed boost because Riot removed the increased cooldown refund just to spite me. But with Mega Gnar, it's a lot more powerful. Instead, throwing people in the direction of your cursor, stunning them if they hit a wall. This is a fantastic engage tool, especially since you can cast it during Hop's transformation, allowing you to go from mini to mega before they can even process it. But it can also drag back escaping enemies towards your team or peel for your carries. Really depends on the situation when it comes to its use. And ultimately, that exemplifies one of the biggest reasons why I love Gnar, and really a lot of champions on this list come to think of it. Flexibility. I haven't drawn attention directly to it, but a common positive I've brought up multiple times with champions is their ability to be played in multiple different ways. Sure, some of them are more set in stone than others, but a ton of them have various ways to build them. AP or Fighter Shyvana, Engager Peeling Poppy, the various different builds Graves has, the multitude of lanes Nautilus can go in, even down to simple things like what items are super good on them. All various different ways to play champions that drastically change the experience. While I love playing my favorite things, I'm the type of guy that can get burnt out if I play it a bit too much. It's why I got so many champions to master rank 7 before the changes. I tend to play a lot more champions than most people, and as a result I also play a lot of different roles. And as shocking as this might sound, but Gnar is the champion on this list that I took the longest break from playing, mainly because I usually played with friends and other people wanted to play top lane. One of the issues Gnar has is that he's hard locked to top lane due to his design. Mega Gnar can be a powerful form of engage, but also gets absolutely destroyed by champions in bot and mid lane. He doesn't have good enough wave clear to jungle effectively and lacks the utility of being a support. So why am I talking about flexibility when Gnar is hard locked to a certain lane? Sure, you have the flexibility of items, and there are a ton of amazing builds I love using on him, but there's something special about Gnar that only the transforming champions have. Flexibility on the fly. Because Mini and Mega fill different roles, you're changing how you approach situations as they go and adjusting based on which form you have. I can poke at the enemy Darius, but if I go Mega too soon, will I be able to farm safely or fight him? Do I build up rage before going in, or go in with no rage to maximize my kiting? Do I force an engage before I go Mini, or play it safe and risk losing teamfight pressure? It's a lot to consider and it can be overwhelming for some, but for me, it's extremely engaging. And every time I pick him back up after not playing for a while, I remind myself why I love this champion, and stuck with this game despite its many issues. And I can't think of any other champion to call my favorite than the one that does that for me. There may have been hundreds of choices to choose from, and some that nearly took the top spots, but for me, Gnar, the missing link, is my favorite champion in League of Legends. Thank you all so much for listening to my very long story, and be sure to tell me yours down in the comments below. My name is Era, and have a wonderful night, everyone. Yeah, wow, that's it, huh? It feels strange to think that something I've planned for longer than I've known my friends is actually done. Yeah, I guess that's it. The video's done. I'm done with League of Legends. I'm sorry to all of my fans who only follow me for